Hello and welcome to 3 Minute Gaming, I'm Nathan, and this is a series compilation of reviews of the entire Gears of War franchise presented in chronological order. Basically, I took all of my individual reviews of the Gears games off the channel and smashed them together. Either way, grab your chainsaw gun, slap on that do-rag, and let's check out reviews for the entire Gears of War franchise. Hello friends, welcome to another 3 Minute Game Pass. I'm Nathan. Today I'm going to tip this Game Pass game is worth your time and bandwidth. Today's game is Gears of War Ultimate Edition. The game that spawned a billion knockoff third-person shooters during the 360 era is back in this shiny new version. Is Gears of War worth replaying in the current year? Gears of War Ultimate Edition is a PC and Xbox release, but it doesn't have any cross-achievements, play, or saves, which is unfortunate. It does feature FPS boost on the new consoles to bump it up to 60 FPS, and the campaign is about 8 to 10 hours long. So what exactly is Gears of War Ultimate Edition? Well, Gears is arguably the cover-based third-person shooter, as it's the game that laid out the foundation upon which hundreds of Unreal Engine games copied even to this day. You play as Marcus Phoenix, disgraced former soldier who is busted out of prison by his buddy Dom to be re-enlisted by the COG in the never-ending war against the Locust Horde. The Locusts are an underground race of uglies who popped up one day to wreak havoc on the planet Sarah and its inhabitants. As Marcus, you and your buddy Dom are tasked to plant a bomb that will scout out all of the Locust tunnels for a future all-out attack. As you progress, you are joined by the other two key members of the squad, the sarcastic mechanic Baird and the ex-Thrashball star Cole, and the group of four blast through the baddies until they reach the mission's end. This game is ultimately a cover-based third-person shooter following all the tropes that have been associated with it, as the game basically invented them all. As a gear, you are essentially magnetically attracted to cover and pop out to take pot shots at enemies. While you could just bunker down and shoot back and forth Police Academy style the entire game, in reality you're going to want to use the environment to your advantage, including flanking, environmental hazards, and so on. The other key mechanic is the active reload. When you press the reload button, you can either wait for it to happen automatically like in other games, or if you tap reload again at just the right time, you will reload sooner. Tap in the sweet spot and you'll not only reload, but you'll also get bonus damage for the reloaded clip. This makes every reload a bit of a mini game, as each weapon has a different sweet spot you'll have to master and get into your muscle memory in order to optimally play the game. Aside from its core third-person cover-based shooting, the game does mix up stuff a bit so it isn't just hiding, shooting, and reloading. Some areas require you to light the way in the dark lest you be eaten by murder birds. A few missions require defending location or even driving a vehicle for about 5 minutes. But mostly you'll be taking cover, flanking, and shooting through a fairly short co-op campaign. So what do I like about Gears of War Ultimate Edition? Well, the campaign is still very engaging and really well paced, with the core combat encounters solid throughout and an absolute blast playing co-op. Additionally, despite the game being very brown and gray, it still looks really good, mostly in part to the great art direction around the world's architecture, which gives it this kind of timeless aesthetic that I really enjoy. And lastly, I still love the core squad of characters in this game. Even if people say they're meathead dude bros, they have a lot of unique characterizations and really great personalities, with some of them being jokey, some of them being serious. They play off each other very well, and there's a reason why these characters have endured. When it comes to the bad, for being the Ultimate Edition, they didn't really address any of the complaints people had with the core Gears problems for this re-release. Things like not being able to be revived, and you get knocked down, you just die and have to reload a checkpoint, and the final boss being absolutely a pain in the ass and anti-fun. I don't know why they didn't make any improvements in that regard. Similarly, while solid, the shooting and cover mechanics do feel a bit clunky compared to its later games, and especially modern games, and it surprised me that they didn't smooth out the game's edges a little bit to try and make the shooting feel more modern. And lastly, gameplay doesn't switch up much over the campaign, which is mostly just you moving from encounter to encounter with similar chest-high walls indicating a fight's about to break out. And this isn't on the list, but in the original Gears of War, over the credits, they used clips from Cole to create a rap song over the end credits, which was amazing and really funny, and they removed it for the Ultimate Edition. How can this be the Ultimate Edition without the Cole rap over the credits? It can't. What the heck are you guys thinking? As you know, Rick, considering a 3-point scale, must play, maybe consider, don't bother. I think Gears of War Ultimate Edition is a maybe consider because it has aged okay, but is absolutely outshined by pretty much any of its sequels in terms of its gameplay. I was really hoping that this Ultimate Edition would be a chance for Coalition to polish this game up and apply some modern improvements to the now dated foundation, but instead it's more of a one-to-one translation, kinks, problems, and all. Gears is still a fun run and a core piece of gaming history, but overall, any of its 360 sequels still outclass it in terms of scope, scale, and gameplay. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and go out there and enjoy Gears of War Ultimate Edition. Hello friends and welcome to 3 Minute Game Pass. I'm Nathan. Today I'm going to tip this Game Pass game is worth your time and bandwidth. Today's game is Gears of War 2. Bigger, badder, and more badass is how Cliff Bleszinski famously described Gears of War 2. Does one of the most celebrated sequels of all time still hold up today? Let's find out. Gears of War 2 is an Xbox 360 game, which means that you will get some upgrades on your Series S and X with auto HDR and upgrade resolutions. Additionally, it does have FPS boost, which bumps up to 60, which is pretty awesome. And the game lasts about 9 to 11 hours. So what exactly is Gears of War 2? Well, it's a cover-based third-person shooter like the rest of the series that is a great example that incremental improvements onto a solid but flawed concept can still create a game that absolutely rules. Gears 2's design philosophy was summed up in the intro quote by game director Cliffy B. The game strives to be as big, bold, and bombastic as possible, with its campaign kicking things into high gear from the beginning and never letting up. Once again, you fill the shoes of Marcus Phoenix along with his Alpha Squad, this time tasked with drilling down into the earth to take the fight to the Locust underground. Of course, things don't go quite as planned, and as the story progresses, you begin to unearth uncomfortable truths about the Locust and COG that might push the team's loyalty to the test. Gears 2 has a if it ain't broke, don't fix it approach to Gears 1's formula, where the core fundamentals of the game haven't really changed. It's still a cover-based third-person shooter with active reloading keeping you engaged. However, it's in the little things that Gears 2 excels gameplay-wise. Combat feels much smoother overall, with things like vaulting, running, and aiming snappier and faster. Guns feel punchier, and overall everything has been polished to an absolute shine. When combined with a host of new enemies to take down, it all fits together nearly perfectly. And it's worth noting that, at the time, this game basically invented the concept of Horde Mode, a PvE variant where you fight off waves of enemies in co-op. Yeah, this is the game that made this now staple of a game mode popular. Thanks, Gears 2. I love Horde Mode. It's my favorite thing about Gears. Just throwing that out there. And honestly, that's basically it. This is essentially a bigger Gears 1, and that is not a bad thing. So what do I like about Gears of War 2? Well, the campaign is absolutely nuts in its insane, bombastic nature. It reminds me of the more recent Fast and the Furious movies, where they know they're absurd and over the top. Because they're aware of it, they can go all in without feeling too much in earnest and it not being super cringy. They are fully aware of how ridiculous everything is, and they are embracing it and running with it, and I love it. And again, this game can be played completely in co-op, which is a great plus too. As mentioned earlier, also, the shooting just feels fantastic, with the slight tweaks and the new enemies really pulling the foundation set in Gears 1 together. This is one of the best feeling third-person shooters you can play. And lastly, the game looks incredible, with its set pieces and graphical fidelity shining even on the 360. It especially looks great up to 4K HDR and 60 FPS on a Series X. It holds up unbelievably well. When it comes to the bad, Gears 2 didn't actually add a ton to the original game in terms of mechanics. I would have liked to see more experimentation with the cover-based shooting. Instead, they just kind of polished it up, which is fine, but not super interesting. Additionally, the story's bombastic madness conflicts somewhat with its attempt at melodrama, where the two really feel like they come from different stories, especially the story of Dom, which I feel could have worked really well if it weren't in a game about chainsawing the heart out of a giant worm that eats cities. And lastly, why doesn't this game have an Ultimate Edition like Gears 1? It certainly deserves it more. I'd love to play Gears 2 Horde on a modern machine and have that kind of get revitalized. Microsoft, make that happen. As you know, I rate games here on a 3-point scale. Must play, maybe consider, don't bother. Yeah, Gears of War 2 is absolutely a must play. It's a gall-darned experience, one that I think everyone should engage in. It's absurd, it's bombastic, it's over the top, badass, insane, gory, and completely ridiculous in all the correct ways. Gears 2 is the game that really set the series on the path to be a classic franchise, and is easily one of the best sequels ever made. Absolutely worth checking out if you enjoy third-person shooters, and it holds up incredibly well even to this day. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and go out there and enjoy the hell out of the bigger, badder, badass Gears of War 2. Hello friends, and welcome to 3-Minute Game Pass. I'm Nathan, and today I'm going to tell you if this Game Pass game is worth your time and bandwidth. Today's game is Gears of War 3. After the electrical shock that was Gears 2, Gears 3 is looking to close out the series in as crazy a way possible. Now with 4-player co-op and a lot more sleeveless shirts, does Gears of War 3 deliver? Gears of War 3 is an Xbox 360 game. That means you get an upgrade if you're on Series S or X. Also has FPS boost, which bumps it up to 60 FPS, which is pretty great, and the game's campaign is about 9 to 10 hours long. So what exactly is Gears of War 3? Well, it is, once again, a cover-based shooter with active reloading and yada 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 blah blah blah. If you were expecting some sort of radical change to the formula at this point, you'd be mistaken. But the lack of any significant change isn't necessarily a bad thing when the core foundation is this solid. Gears 3 is the end of the Locust War and Phoenix's core story arc, with most of the game actually split between two different squads, one led by Phoenix and the other by Cole. After revelations at the end of Gears 2, which I will not spoil, Marcus is trying to find the final research of his father in the hopes that he can use it to eliminate not only the Locust Queen, but all of the Locusts simultaneously. But times are very rough. The COG is scattered and basically disbanded at this point, with the humans barely holding on by a thread for survival and absolutely losing this war. This leads to a desperate feeling across the entire campaign, resulting in a very different tone when compared to the hoorah kill 'em all stylings of Gears of War 2. Gameplay-wise, there isn't much different here. There's a bunch of new weapons to use, which all feel great, and the core enemies have been changed from the Locust to the Lambent, which have the added benefit of exploding when you kill them, as well as a bunch more new enemies that'll keep testing your mettle. The other big improvement is 4-player co-op, as each squad is now much bigger, which does lead to the game being a bit easier overall, especially if you play with 3 other human players. The game also featured a fantastic upgrade to the Horde mode, which no one is playing anymore, which makes me sad because at the time it sucked hours upon hours of my life away with its additions such as defense building and tons more great mechanics. Aside from that though, there really isn't that much more to say about Gears 3. It maintains the level of quality Gears 2 set in stone and continues to excel at what it does best: bombastic third-person cover-based shooting. So what do I like about Gears of War 3? Well, the campaign is still great and it is absolutely a solid exit to the series. A lot of times trilogies kind of stumble across the finish line when it comes to closing out a big popular series, but I feel Gears 3 delivered it in spades. Secondly, this game still fantastic art direction, probably some of the best in the series, with a focus on more colorful environments, diverse locations, and tons of cute touches. Like, for example, turrets are now just guns strapped to platforms as the war resources have completely dried up. Like, there's tons of really great world building in this game. And lastly, the Gears formula is still solid, with satisfying shooting and excellent production values, and plays really well in 4-player co-op, which is a really nice touch. When it comes to the bad, it still suffers a bit from the issue where the more poignant story moments feel at odds with the absurdity of the rest of the campaign. But to this game's credit, the melodrama does work a little better here, as the tone is much more somber overall when compared to Gears of War 2. They also, again, didn't really add much gameplay-wise, even with polish from Gears 2 to 3. This is essentially the same game with a new coat of paint. And lastly, it might have closed the door a little too tightly at the end of the series, as its ending made it really hard for a sequel to ever make sense. Though, if I'm being honest, that's more Gears of War 4's problem than Gears of War 3's, but it was weird that they didn't really leave much open. As you know, games here on a 3-point scale, must play, maybe consider, don't bother. Yeah, Gears of War 3 is absolutely a must play. As a conclusion to the original Gears trilogy, Gears 3 absolutely delivers. While it doesn't really innovate in any way in its campaign aside from the 4-player co-op, the core of Gears 2 was so solid that just getting more of it still works. With some fantastic art direction and a satisfying conclusion to the story, Gears 3 is possibly the pinnacle of the epic created Gears games, and it's definitely a high point for the series. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and go out there and enjoy the hell out of Gears of War 3. Hello friends, and welcome to another 3-minute Game Pass. I'm Nathan, and today I'm going to tell you if this Game Pass game is worth your time and bandwidth. Today's game is Gears of War Judgement. Where do you go after Gears of War 3? Well, back in time apparently with another 4-player co-op game, this time starring series co-star Baird. With a different developer at the helm, is this spin-off game worth checking out? Let's find out. Gears of War Judgement is an Xbox 360 game, which means you get the normal stuff of upgraded resolutions and auto HDR on the series consoles. It also includes FPS boosts to bump this sucker up to 60 FPS, and the game only lasts about 6 to 8 hours. What exactly is Gears of War Judgement? Well, it's a spin-off game made by People Can Fly, the guys who made Outriders and Bulletstorm, under the supervision of the series' previous showrunner, Epic Mega Games. It still has the same cover-based third-person shooting as before, but with a more bite-sized, arcadey style gameplay. You play as Baird and his squad on trial for doing something illegal during the start of the Locust War. And the entire story is told through flashback as each squad member delivers their testimony on what happened. This means the game is split into chunks where you control each character, and they always end by jumping back to the present and eventually the final resolution to whether Baird and crew are guilty or not of their crimes. While the fundamental gameplay of cover-based shooting is similar, Judgment actually feels a fair bit different than the previous Gears games. Instead of a big, continuous, uninterrupted story, Judgment instead chunks out its combat arenas into separate zones, each of which have various sub-objectives and requirements to gain high score and rank. Objectives might include things like kills with a certain weapon or beating an area in a certain time, and additionally, each area has kind of a hard mode modifier, which will add things like poison gas or obscured vision to increase your score further. Similarly, other things in the game have been stripped down for the sake of streamlining, such as ammo being universal, and you only can carry 2 weapons rather than the usual 3. This leads to the game feeling a fair bit different than Gears 2 and 3, which were more focused around their insane campaign escalations and the linear story, and now it's a lot more gamey, where you try and play it optimally in each area, while also overcoming the new challenges the game's throwing at you. Overall, while Judgment doesn't mix up the core gameplay too much, its changes to the overall formula do make it feel like a different game from the previous in the franchise, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing. So what do I like about Gears of War Judgment? Well, the arcadey, mini-objective based zones of Gears combat actually works really well. So well, in fact, I'm surprised they haven't recycled it as like a mode for future installments, especially the ability to make each area harder for a better score. I'm really glad they mixed this up rather than just attempting to clone Gears of War 2. Additionally, the storytelling method of switching between the testimonies of various squad members is a neat idea, and it allows the game to hop around and keep the story very brisk. Lastly, lastly, small tweaks like universal ammo and easier weapon swapping might piss off serious purists, but for this game, the streamlining actually makes the game feel much more modern and fast-paced, and I actually really liked it. It was a good match. When it comes to the bad, if you really boil it down, this is still just core Gears combat with an arcadey layer on top. Nothing significant has been changed or improved still. Additionally, the story is overall inconsequential to the overall Gears universe and doesn't ever come close to the bombastic heights and just greatness of the previous trilogy. And lastly, it really does feel like a filler game because of the last two bullet points I just mentioned, which, while that isn't necessarily a bad thing, does make the game not really feel like a AAA game, unlike the previous 3 games in the franchise. As you know, I rate games here on a 3-point scale: must play, maybe consider, don't bother. Gears of War Judgement is definitely a maybe consider, but I also think it's a bit of a hidden gem. It does feel weird giving a game in such a huge franchise a hidden gem award, but I feel this game is criminally overlooked with how unique it is for a Gears game. Its more arcadey style of gameplay does a really fantastic job of injecting some innovation into the franchise and makes for a great game to play in small bursts or replay for high scores with friends. While its story isn't exactly crucial to the overall Gears universe, if you are wanting more Gears gameplay and really just that great gameplay, this is a fun diversion. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and go out there and enjoy Gears of War Judgment. Hello friends, and welcome to another episode of 3 Minute Game Pass. I'm Nathan, and today I'm going to tip this Game Pass game is worth your time and bandwidth. Today's game is Gears of War 4. 5 years after Gears of War 3 was released, and with a new developer at the helm, Gears of War 4 is attempting to kickstart the franchise with new characters, enemies, and more. Is it worth jumping back into cover and active reloading? Gears of War 4 is a PC and Xbox cross-release that does feature cross-play and cross-save, which is pretty awesome. It is upgraded with FPS boost to bump it up to 60, and the game lasts about 9 to 11 hours. So what exactly is Gears of War 4? Well, it's a cover-based third-person shooter with active reload. I know, I'm shocked too. But this time it's made by a completely new studio, the Coalition, as Epic has long since left the franchise. Over 20 years have passed since the end of Gears of War 4, and in that time the COG have decided to just stop pretending to be fascist overlords and are now just going all in on it. A few small human groups are rebelling against this new world order and living outside of the settlements. One of these groups is our main character JD, who is Marcus Phoenix and Anya's son, as well as an ex-COG, and his buddies Del and Kate. Of course, rebelling against the humans is one thing, but you can't have a Gears game without ugly beasties, and the new batch is called the Swarm, Locust spin-offs who harvest humans to create more swarmies with. So it's up to JD and company to fight off both the COG fascists and the new beasties alongside familiar faces from the original trilogy. Gameplay-wise, little has changed. You'll still be cover shooting, but there are a handful of new additions. For example, you can actually vault over cover faster, including kicking enemies that are hiding on the other side, as well as grabbing an enemy across from you in cover for a free instant kill execution, which is something the series probably actually should have had for a long time. There are tons of new enemies as well, mostly in the form of COG defense robots, with most of the Swarm acting fairly similar to Locust with the exception of a lot of the big beastie bosses and bigger enemies. The game also has a larger focus on environmental influencing of the battlefield, including storms and lightning and stuff like that to help keep encounters fresh. The game also added a bunch to Horde mode, including a handful of classes and improved building defenses, but nobody is playing it anymore because they're all playing Gears 5 Horde mode instead, so I'm not going to talk more about it. Overall, Gears 4 is an attempt to continue the story that ended neatly after Gears 3 with new characters, a few new mechanics, but the same core gameplay as before. So what do I like about Gears of War 4? Well, I mean, the gameplay is still great. If you liked Gears gameplay previously, you'll like it here. It's still pretty fun, and it's still solid. I also appreciate the attempt to do a lot of original stuff rather than just rehash the original Gears 1. While bringing back the Locust is a bit lazy, the fact that it brings the COG's not-so-subtle fascist overtones from the first 3 games into the spotlight was pretty neat for the story. And lastly, this game has some really solid art direction with a large diversity of locations and the environmental effects and arenas not only affecting gameplay but looking awesome as well. This game is a bit of a graphical powerhouse, especially running at 60 FPS. When it comes to the bad, JD is the most boring main character on the planet and doesn't have the kind of weight like Marcus Phoenix did to lead the franchise. On top of that, the story's pace is really painfully slow, especially when compared to the rest of the series. Additionally, there just really isn't a lot of innovation here when it comes to the core combat to really get too excited. This isn't Doom 2016 or Halo Infinite, it's just more Gears. And lastly, fighting robots is boring. There, I said it. You play Gears games because it's over-the-top violent and bloody, and chainsawing robots just isn't as satisfying, and you fight them for like the first half of the game. Am I getting put on a watch list for saying that I want to kill people instead of robots? Yeah, probably. As you know, I keep here on a 3-point scale. Must play, maybe consider, and don't bother. This is definitely a maybe consider. While I was excited to see Gears of War returning, Gears of War 4 left me more than a bit wanting. While I really do love the new Horde mode, but no one's playing it anymore, so can't really really included in this review. The campaign, and particularly the new characters, felt a bit like duds to me in this first round. While there's still a solid game throughout, it certainly doesn't inject the same level of excitement that the previous trilogy instilled. This is not a bad game, but also one I'm not super excited about. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and go out there and enjoy Gears of War 4. Hello and welcome to another 3-minute Game Pass. I'm Nathan, and today I'm going to tip this Game Pass game is with your time and bandwidth. Today's game is Gears 5. The Coalition is back and war is over, as the franchise is now just called Gears, which honestly makes more sense because I haven't said the of war part in normal conversation since Gears 2. See, I just did it right then. I can't even help myself, that wasn't even in the script. Anyway, is Gears 5 good? Gears 5 is a PC and Xbox cross-release that features cross-play and cross-save. Additionally, it is Series S and X upgraded for better frame rates and visual fidelity, and the game lasts about 11 to 14 hours for the campaign. So what exactly is Gears 5? Well, it's another cover-based third-person shooter and a continuation of the story in Gears 4. However, this one has two tricks up its sleeve: a semi-open world campaign and a kick-ass horde mode. In the campaign, you start as boring-faced JD for the first part of the game in a linear style Gears mission, but jump ahead and we find out pretty quick that the main character of Gears 5 is actually Kate, JD, and the robot Jack, who set off on an open world quest to find out who Kate really is, as well as the origin of the Swarm and Locust. Once you hit that point in the story, the game changes to a semi-open world experience with a large map and a vehicle skiff that you can use to get from place to place. Scattered across the map are small zones where you can go and participate in mini Gears fights, usually more challenging than the main game, that reward you with upgrades to your robot Jack, who you can command to do all sorts of stuff like stun enemies or scan the battlefield. Outside of the campaign, Gears offers its usual competitive multiplayer, but also has some improvements on the popular Horde mode, which I love, so I'm going to talk about. First, they added a Horde Frenzy mode, which is just 12 Horde waves instead of 50, which means you don't have to spend an entire day playing through one Horde game. There's also a ton of classes to choose from, each of which have their own abilities and passive upgrades, as well as cards that you can earn and upgrade to augment the class further and kind of build your own character. These classes can also be used in the new game mode Escape, paired with the free, on Game Pass, Hivebuster DLC. Escape basically tosses you in an area and you have to, well, escape, with almost no weapons and unlimited timeline. Those are the PvE modes. Speaking of Hivebusters, there's also Hivebusters Campaign DLC, which is a 3-player co-op experience following a crew of side characters trying to blow up swarm hives. It's fairly short, but each character has their own unique abilities that you have to use together, which is actually quite a bit of fun if you can get 2 friends to play it with you, even if it is pretty short. So yeah, Gears 5 has a boatload of content, so much I can't talk about it all in this review's time frame. Some minor improvements to the Gears combat, like being able to fire heavy weapons while moving, and improved Horde mode, and more. So what do I like about Gears 5? Well, the semi-open world is a great way to freshen up the usually linear Gears campaign, allowing you to pick and choose where you explore, making the world feel more interconnected than it did before. I think this is a good idea, and I hope they carry it on to future Gears games. This game also looks incredible, running at 60 FPS on modern hardware and having some really great graphical fidelity and touches. This is definitely a looker for the console, and it's really great, especially on series systems. And lastly, this is my favorite Horde mode out of all the Gears Horde modes, and this is coming from the guy who lived and breathed Gears 2 and 3's Horde mode back in the day. The different classes, the card collection, the difficulty modifiers, the 12 and 50 wave variants, daily hordes. There's so much here and it's so great, even if it's not exactly balanced. When it comes to the bad, this game still hasn't had its big Halo Infinite or Doom 2016 moment of figuring out what to do with this franchise to truly modernize it. And on that note, it does lack a bit of the punchy, bombastic soul of the franchise that existed with the original trilogy. A second downer is Escape mode just straight up sucks. I appreciated them trying to make a new PvE mode, and I like that you can make your own escapes, but this one is just completely half-baked and no one is ever playing it. And lastly, while I did enjoy the story, I still feel that Kate, like JD from the last game, doesn't really have the narrative weight needed to carry the entire campaign the way Marcus Phoenix and the original crew did. It does do better in this game than in 4, but still could use some work. There's no right games here on a 3-point scale. Must play, maybe consider, don't bother. I do think Gears 5 is a must play. It had a really rough launch that I think turned a lot of players away, but now in 2022, I feel like it's in a really good spot, and Coalition are riding the course where Gears 4 was just a bit of a retread. Again, it doesn't have that injection of new ideas that this franchise needs, but it does feel like the Coalition is gaining confidence to change the series in some interesting ways in order to revitalize the franchise. With its fairly solid campaign and absolutely amazing PvE Horde mode, I think Gears 5 is a great addition to the franchise, and I really hope that the Coalition continues to improve and completely knocks Gears 6 out of the park. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and go out there and enjoy the hell out of Gears 5. Hello friends, and welcome to another 3-minute Game Pass. I'm Nathan, and today I'm going to tip this Game Pass games worth your time and bandwidth. Today's game is Gears Tactics. Gears of War, distinguished game where you go into cover and shoot stuff. Wait, what if you did that, but it was XCOM? Squad-based tactics? Psycho Mantis? Gears Tactics is a PC and Xbox cross-release. It does feature cross-achievements, but for whatever reason, it does not cross-save. It is Series S and X upgraded for better frame rate and visuals, and the game will last you about 20 to 25 hours. So what exactly is Gears Tactics? Well, it's a spin-off of the popular Gears of War franchise, or just Gears now, I guess, which ditches third-person shooting for a squad-based, turn-based tactics game in the vein of XCOM. The game takes place before the original Gears trilogy at the start of the Locust War. You play as Gabe, a gear-turned mechanic who is pulled out of the chop shop and back into the war to go fight some locusts. The game is, as stated, a turn-based tactical shooter with lots of the trappings of the genre. You're given an allotment of action points per character, and you can use those to move, shoot, reload, or perform abilities. What sets this game apart is its injection of Gears of War mechanics and aesthetic that work really well. Abilities like being able to chainsaw enemies or use a bayonet charge from Gears games proper are here, as well as executing downed enemies, which give your squad more action points as a reward. And staples like emergence holes will continue to spawn enemies until grenaded, so on and so forth. Your active squad can consist up to 4 teammates plus 1 if you're playing the Jack mode, and all units have a different class with varying abilities and specializations, such as Point with stealth and a shotgun, Medic with heal grenades, or a Heavy with a mulcher. You have story characters that you bring along as well, but you can also recruit generic mercenaries to fill in the class gaps. Additionally, each character levels up and can upgrade their abilities separate, as well as find gear on the battlefield or as a reward for missions, which further augment abilities. These abilities end up being super powerful, with stuff like having bayonet charge fully refund ability points or cooldown faster, leading to some crazy strats. While the game still provides a lot of tactical brain work even on the easiest difficulty, it's considerably more forgiving than an XCOM game, making it worth considering if you've been playing these games before and found them a little too brutal. So overall, this is a turn-based tactics game in the Gears universe that keeps a lot of that Gears flavor. So what do I like about Gears Tactics? Well, the mix of mechanical staples from base Gears into a tactics environment is so seamless, it feels like Gears of War was made for this kind of game. As a fan of Gears, I was able to easily get into the groove with this game and feel like a tactical genius in no time. This is chocolate and peanut butter levels of mixing here. Additionally, the missions have a large amount of variety and keep on adding new enemies and mechanics throughout almost the entire game, which makes every encounter feel relatively fresh. And lastly, I really like this game's bosses. They're fantastic and excellent capstones to acts, requiring you to mix up your strategies and keep an eye on your teammates and really master everything you've learned up until that point. When it comes to the bad, these games always suffer from the RNG gods not smiling on you, and this one is the same. Missing with an 80% chance is still morale crushing, although this game does feel a little more lenient than XCOM, as you can also land like partial hits to help make up for it a little bit. Additionally, the story I didn't find particularly interesting, even though I did really like the characters. It's mostly just a standard war story of recruit the guys and get the thing that these Gears games tend to have. And lastly, while you can do some squad customization, it isn't nearly to the extent of base building and expansion that you get in, say, an XCOM game. You're really just kind of making the best party you can and equiping them, and that's the end of that. So as you know, rate games here on a 3-point scale. Must play, maybe consider, don't bother. I think Gears Tactics is a must play. I think a lot of people overlook this game because it was a Gears of War spin-off that changed genres, but Gears Tactics is so good. It feels like a mainline game in the franchise. The blend of Gears of War mechanics and the tactical environment, like I said before, peanut butter and chocolate, works nearly perfectly, and the game strikes a really good balance of being simple enough for beginners to the genre to come to grips with its mechanics, while also providing a fleshed out tactical experience for those who enjoy more challenge. It is absolutely a solid entry to this franchise, and I really hope it gets a sequel. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and go out there and enjoy the hell out of Gears Tactics.